Hi, it's Laura Decamarini18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. In this video, I'm making a VR to Tom Benjamin, who has shared some queer decks for Pride Month, since it is June, Pride Month, but that are, of course, great decks to read with year-round. And so I wanted to share these decks with you, and there's quite a few, so we'll be here for a while. But before I did that, I wanted to speak a little bit about the terminology I've chosen for this video, as well as kind of the selection criteria, I guess, that went into picking which decks I would include in this video. So I really liked that Tom Benjamin kind of talked about the selection process of the different decks that he included, and he left it very open, right? He talked about kind of queer decks, queer adjacent decks, decks that feel queer to him, you know. And I feel like that's an acknowledgement that this is going to be, you know, different for different people, and I think that that's important, and that's why I wanted to speak a little bit about why I've picked the decks that I've picked. I have chosen to refer to my video in terms of 2SLGBTQIA+ decks, because what I'm sharing in this video are decks that I feel depict and represent the 2SLGBTQIA+ community, or in some cases represent kind of a part of that community. Some of the decks, for example, that I have only include women, for instance. And so in doing that, I've limited my selections to decks that depict humans. And I believe all of the decks in this selection here are decks that are created or created in part by members of the 2SLGBTQIA+ community. There are a couple of decks here that are collaborative decks with, you know, a bunch of different artists each making a card or two. I don't presume like every person's identity involved in those projects, but certainly these are all community created decks as I understand them, that represent 2SLGBTQIA+ folks. I've chosen not to call them queer decks necessarily for a couple of reasons. One is what I spoke about a little bit in my recent video unboxing the Queer Tarot, where I mentioned that I feel like this kind of slippage into using queer as a umbrella term for the community can be troublesome, in that not everybody who is, for example, a member of the 2SLGBTQIA+ community necessarily feels an affinity to the word queer, or likes or feels comfortable with the word queer. So I don't want to necessarily be, for example, using language for a deck creator or their work that they may or may not personally feel comfortable with, right? So there's that. But also, you know, a second reason that I maybe stumbled around in my last video, but didn't get too much. And that has to do with kind of the politics of queer. So just briefly, I wanted to share, I think, an explanation that gets at this. And this is a really short quote from the beginning of an essay called "Toward the Queerest Insurrection." And this came out in the mid-2000s, like 2006 or 7, somewhere in there. Anyway, they start off, and it's written by a group, and they start off talking about kind of why LGBT and queer are not the same thing, right? And saying that queer is not just, you know, another identity, it's not just a sum of different identities. And something that I like that they write, they say, queer is a territory of tension, defined against the dominant narrative of white hetero-monogamous patriarchy, but also an affinity with all who are marginalized, othered, and oppressed. Queer is the abnormal, the strange, the dangerous. Queer involves our sexuality and our gender, but so much more. It is our desire and fantasies, and more still. Queer is the cohesion of everything in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world. Queer is a total rejection of the regime of the normal. Queer is a total rejection of the regime of the normal, the system of sorting things into normal and abnormal, right? And if you watched my unboxing, of the Queer Tarot, you will know that I reacted quite viscerally to a comment in the guidebook about the importance of normalizing queer people, right? and I know, like, this may seem really pedantic or something, but and I responded to it saying, like, I don't want to be normalized. I don't want to be normalized in this cultural context, right? And the reason is because of my thinking of queer as in opposition to a regime of the normal, in opposition to the idea that some ways of being sexual, that some ways of being gendered are just normal and others aren't, right? Queer for me is a politic that is against that distinction, against that sorting. The point is not wanting to be on the other side of the line, the side where the normal shit is, right? That is not the point. Right? And for me, it can never be the point. And too often, LGBT movements, or like mainstream movements, rights-based movements, have kind of gone down this road, right, of trying to normalize, right? And what happens when those kind of politics end up being the focus of our social justice work, as an attempt to normalize, what happens is that those of us, those of our community who best approximate the normal, those who can be, the most desexualized and monogamous and upwardly mobile, with disposable income and all of these things, the most privileged members of the community get further at the expense of everyone else who is positioned as abnormal, right? And that's really dangerous. That's really, really dangerous. And so, I reacted against this, we need to kind of normalize queer people with this, like, visceral, like, fuck that, No, that's not something I'm ever going to go with. So that is all to say, that I think that it is important, and Kathu Tarot, who has a great channel, commented on my unboxing of this, with this point too. It's important for me to distinguish talking about 2SLGBTQIA+ and talking about queer, because when you use them to refer to the same thing, then the distinctiveness of a queer politic is obscured, right? It gets lost. I think it's totally possible to have a deck or a television show or whatever you want to think about that has some representation of people who aren't straight and people who aren't cis in it that is not queer. Okay? I think it is entirely possible to represent members of our communities in media in various kinds of ways without really doing anything to challenge the status quo of cis heteropatriarchy at all. Okay? And so that is why I've titled this video the way it is, because what I'm talking about in this video is not necessarily decks that revolutionize our conceptions of the tarot, and not necessarily decks that revolutionize our conceptions of gender or sexuality or representation, in decks or in general. I'm talking about decks that depict us, that depict us in ways that have been important to me and in ways that I've appreciated. And not to say that any of these decks are perfect in terms of representation or anything like that, but these are all decks that I experience as visually representing aspects of the 2SLGBTQIA+ community and aspects of some of the experiences of folks who comprise that community. So that is my focus. And thank you for being patient with me while I got out my criteria. Okay, so these are decks that visually represent or depict members of the 2SLGBTQIA+ community, that, in different ways and for different reasons that I appreciate or have appreciated. So without further ado, on to the decks. I have quite the stack, actually. Like 13 or 14 decks. So I'm going to try to not take 2 hours, but here we go. I'm going to timestamp as well. So the spoiler, the whole list is in the description box. The first deck is a Queer Tarot, which I just did an unboxing of. And, you know, I was hard on the book, admittedly. I really like the deck. I really like the deck a lot. I like the colors. I like the art style. I like these, again, like lovingly created, beautiful portraits of actual people who are members of the 2SLGBTQIA plus community, the models. And I think it's a great deck. And you know that you know, straightforwardly Smith-Waite decks are not usually how I read. They're not the decks I read with the most. But this, I think, is a really successful one. And there's a lot that I really like about this. I really like that the models' pronouns and a bit about them are included in the guidebook. I think the guidebook could have pushed the politic further. But I think the cards are beautiful. I love that there is quite a few different kinds of diversity in this deck. There is some range of body sizes in this deck. There is some ethnic diversity in this deck. There's gender diversity in this deck. And there's a cat in the sky that looks slightly like Bandit if Bandit had long hair. So I really like this. And I have a pouch coming from Kelly Bear that's going to go with this deck. I was very speedy when the shop opened, so I'm excited for that too, to have a really neon pouch that's going to go with this neon deck. I love this as a project. I love this as a project celebrating real people and featuring them all looking fabulous in all of these cards. It's great. I'm just not going to look at the book. But I think the cards are great. I'm really happy with it. So that's deck number 1, the Queer Tarot. The second deck I chose is the Neo Tarot by Jericho Mandiber. And the Neo Tarot is also a Smith-Waite informed deck. The creator is a queer woman of color. And this deck, the guidebook is written in a very inclusive way. I find it's a self-care focused deck and a self-care focused guidebook with activities for each card. And it's written very inclusively. There's some range of skin tones in this deck. There is some range of body sizes in this deck. And there's gender diversity in this deck as I read it as well. You can see this Lover's card. There are many figures in this deck who I would say you know, are not particularly gendered. Like, of course, you cannot tell someone's gender just by looking at them. That's an important thing to keep in mind. But they don't feel, you know, rigidly gendered in a binary kind of way, at all. And I look at, like, I did set aside some of these cards, like this Two of Cups. Doesn't read in a particularly gendered way to me at all. The Ten of Cups as well. You know, we see a embrace there. This is a deck that I can find myself in this deck. And it in no way does this deck feel in the slightest way anywhere like gender stereotypy or anything like that. So I appreciate this deck as a queer deck that messes with, I would say, the ways that particular cards are traditionally in Smith-Waite decks kind of represented in particular kinds of gendered ways. This deck deviates from that quite a bit in ways that I really appreciate and like seeing in a mass market deck for sure. So that is a Neo Tarot. I have not chosen all tarot decks. So the next one that I've chosen is actually the Queer Lenormand by Mariana Andrade, and this was a Kickstarter project. And the back of the box writes, the Queer Lenormand deck is a modern design with colorful artwork by queer artist Mariana Andrade, developed with extra cards to represent all within the LGBTQIA plus community with a diversity of race and gender identities. And so this one, you know, is specifically made to get around some of the constraints of the structure of a traditional Lenormand deck in terms of the man card and the woman card as significators. And I put this in order. I love the rainbow house. And the backs are rainbow too. So that's fun. Gotta have some rainbow shit in an LGBTQIA deck, right? So all of the people cards, pretty much, we have multiple. We have multiple child cards. The star is pretty rainbow as well. And so getting to the people cards, we get a lot in this deck. So for the man card, there are gentlemen in a Lenormand. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if you were, you know, reading for a gay male client, for example, you could have two male cards to represent that client and their significant other, for example, rather than being stuck with a Lenormand deck with a gentleman and a lady in it and telling people to use their imagination, which is shitty. Similarly, for the woman card, we have lots. And they have different kind of gender presentations and styles as well. Lots and lots of significator cards to pick from. And the creator also put in quite a few person cards, which have a lot of range in terms of gender presentation as well. And getting away from the gentleman and lady structure of Lenormand, making Lenormand more functional. And they also have drag queen and drag king significator cards as well. So this is one that, you know, with a system that, you know, does not feel necessarily very inclusive in its kind of traditional structure, has been designed with the community in mind in terms of giving a lot of options and making things really customizable. So I think that that's really great. And I'm happy to have it. I don't own very many Lenormand decks because, you know, the structure is what it is. But I'm happy to own this one. Next up is the deck with many eyes. Surprising for me. You know I don't like many eyes. The Many Queens Tarot by Letty Jane Rennekamp, I think is the creator's name. Yeah, Letty Jane Rennekamp. And this is a deck that is very diverse in terms of gender presentation. there's a couple of landscape cards. I love that this deck has, you know, tons of body hair in it. I'm a body hair fan, so I love that there's lots of leg hair and armpit hair going on in this deck. I really like the people in this deck a lot. And again, it's a deck that doesn't adhere to any kind of traditional, we'll say, normative's a better word, normative expectations about what you know, someone's gender might look like on a particular card. It's a deck that has what I read as very clear trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, genderqueer kinds of representation in it as well. There are a range of body shapes and body sizes in this deck. And it feels like it has a sense of humor, which I also really like. I love the fabulous fashions, as you all know that I love a fabulous fashion in a deck, for sure. And there's lots of, you know, there's lots of tattoos and piercings, and I like how much nudity there is, you know. Definitely feels like a deck that represents segments of the 2SLGBTQIA plus community, for sure. This is a deck that I bought specifically for kind of self-love around the body and my body and embodiment, and have found really solidly supportive in that area in particular. And so it's a deck that I really, really love. Many Queens Tarot. Next up, I have the Landback Tarot and Oracle of Colonization by Anti-K's Tarot. And the back of the box notes that Landback Tarot and Oracle of Colonization is Indigenous, brown, and gender neutral. This deck presents classic RWS understandings from a radical decolonial perspective, looking towards Indigenous futures of autonomy, freedom, and land back. And this deck definitely, for me, reads as a queer deck. I didn't really pull out cards in particular, but I did, you know, there is a card that is specifically identity and gender from the Oracle section of the deck. I have the two separated, the Oracle and the Tarot here, but not in any kind of order. Where does one end and the other one begin? Okay. So the guidebook for this deck is mostly gender neutral language. There's a lot of they, them pronouns in the guidebook, with I think the exception of when, you know, particular individuals are being represented, right? And these figures read to me as not, in many cases, not kind of gendered in any particular sort of way. Certainly not gendered in a like binary sort of way at all. Feels like a very gender diverse deck to me. And it's a deck that speaks to, in it, you know, in its content and in its guidebook, the realities of colonial hetero cis patriarchy. in ways that are really important. So that is the Lenormand Tarot and Oracle of Colonization by Auntie Kay's Tarot. And if you haven't already watched it, I will say, if you haven't yet, go to Auntie Kay's Tarot YouTube and watch the VR that she made to this discussion about queer decks for Pride Month. It is such a good video. It is so much joy watching that video. Please go and watch it. It is a, family VR. It's fantastic. Please go watch it. The next deck I have to share with you is the Next World Tarot by Christy C. Rode. This is a queer deck. This is a queer deck in a fuck normativity queer deck way that I cherish. This one is a really overtly political deck that features so much diversity in so many respects. It very, very much depicts members of our 2SLGBTQIA plus community, gender diversity, sexual diversity, rebellion against cis heteropatriarchal understandings of sexuality and gender in a really clear way. And the guidebook does too. In some ways, it's interesting because this deck, in terms of the backdrops and stuff, there is something about this deck that is a little bit almost like post-apocalyptic rebuild in terms of its imagery. But this is also the deck that I think for me, out of the decks in my collection, this is the deck that kind of looks most like my community. I like that there's lots of body hair and piercings and tattoos, of course. And lots of amazing fashion choices as well. I love this deck. And I have the mini deck too. This deck has age diversity, which a lot of decks are missing. Our community is not all in their 20s. Diversity of body shapes, ethnic diversity. Amazing. I love this deck. This is a queer deck. Love, love, love. This is one of my all-time favorites. I'm not going to even try to get all of these back in their boxes while you all are watching as I bump my computer. Yeah, this deck is just amazing. Part of the introduction from the guidebook says the next world aims to dismantle the patriarchal foundations of security culture as it has silenced survivors of institutionalized violence for far too long, aims to decolonize the stories of our grandparents as our connections to the universe are often challenged by the fog of patriarchy and imperialism. Next world is reviewing our definitions of gender and respecting those of others. The next world is transfeminist. It's understanding historical power structures about gender expression. It's intersectional, as discussing gender and race is vital to feminism. Really, really good. I love this deck. Next up, I have the Sapphic Enchantress Tarot deck, which is a major arcana deck by Shamira Yashin. And this little deck was a wonderful, much cherished gift from my friend Liz. Thank you, Liz. I love this deck. And this is a really like punk rock DIY hand cut out of card stock deck that I think is fabulous. And there's flower petals in the box. And this deck is very explicitly feminist deck, very explicitly queer in the political sense deck. And the creator writes, I designed this tarot deck with the intention of creating a card system that could resonate with an audience especially consisting of people of marginalized genders and sexual orientations. This deck does only depict women. And the creator notes, this tarot deck is deliberately representative of all women. TERFs are not welcome here. It is a trans-inclusive deck. The prominent depiction of Sapphic women situated in natural settings is a subtle response to the homophobic reduction of queer love and intimacy to something that is unnatural. We are not unnatural. The way I depict the women in these cards is a statement against the mainstream symbolic violence that is wrought upon women through their representation in ways that would appeal to the male gaze, in ways that reduce them to only responding to that gaze. Including body fat, body hair, cellulite, stretch marks, and scars included in these feminist depictions of women in this deck. This is a queer deck in the political sense. Absolutely. And I love how much nudity is in this deck and how many different bodies are represented in that. You know, I think there can be sometimes in LGBTQIA kind of representations, there can be a kind of desexualizing that happens in service of that idea of normalizing that is concerning, right? It's like every year the nonsense about how there shouldn't be nudity at the Pride Parade. It's like, you can tell what I think about that. And this creator, as I understand it, is working on doing a full deck. This one is the majors only. I will be first in line for the full deck when it comes out. Love it. Love, love, love. This deck. So that is the Sapphic Enchantress Tarot by Aishamiri Yashin that I'm going to struggle to get back into the box. I really appreciate the inclusiveness of the feminism in the vision of this deck. So definitely one that I would include in this video. Going along, the next two I will talk about together because they're by the same creator. And those are Cedar McLeod's decks, which are the Numinous Tarot and the Threadbound Oracle. They also have another deck, the Uncertain Oracle, which I didn't include in this video because it is a abstract watercolor painting deck. It doesn't depict anybody, queer or otherwise. So that's why that one isn't here. I love that deck too. The Numinous Tarot is a deck that feels to me very youthful, and it has some diversity in a number of different respects as well. It certainly has kind of gender and sexual diversity throughout. This is a portrait of Cedar McLeod, the creator of the deck. A self-portrait. And this deck is special to me because this deck is the first deck that I ever owned where the entire thing is gender neutral. The guidebook is entirely gender neutral. Everyone is referred to with they them pronouns in the guidebook. No matter, you know, how they look or which card they're on, it's all they them. And all of the card titles are rendered in gender neutral ways. See, the High Priestess becomes the Diviner. The suits are renamed as well. The court cards are, of course, all renamed. We have the Mystic of Candles, for example. Dreamer. All renamed gender neutrally, and the gender kind of presentations of the people depicted do not follow any kind of normative pattern at all. So I really like this one. This is the deck that's sitting on my table right now for daily draws, is the Numinous Tarot. The Threadbound Oracle is an oracle deck that goes with a novel that Cedar wrote called, I believe, The Thread That Binds, and it has to do with a magical library, so you know that I got it and read it. And so the characters in these cards are characters from the book. And so some of the characters I think are represented more than once in the different cards. And the characters in the book cross a couple of different generations. So there's some age diversity in this one. I would say more so actually in this one than in the Numinous. There are some, I'm just flipping through the cards that don't have people on them. There are quite a few in this one that don't. And then the characters in the book also you know, encompass gender diversity and sexual diversity and represent a number of different identities, have a number of different identities. So I appreciate this deck and the book. And the book addresses, you know, what I think of as queer themes in thinking about found family and building families. There's a picture in the card called The Family, as the characters form a family in the book. I really appreciate the representation in this deck. And I hear there's a sequel to the book coming out. So I will be eagerly awaiting Cedar's next book that is set in the Threadbound Oracle universe. I swear I don't have decks going on forever. I have 5 more decks to share. So we have, next is Thea's Tarot by Ruth West. This is a deck that came out in the early 80s. And it's a feminist deck. And there is lots of representation of particularly queer women. I love this one. And this deck feels like it, you know, is a rejection of gender stereotypes. It feels like there's quite a bit of diversity, I think. There is some diversity in body size. Obviously, it's a black and white. It's a black and white deck, which perhaps constrains things to some extent. I love this. This is my like aspirational life card. You can see the cat on the end of the couch there. For a 9 of Pentacles, this is like, yeah, that's living the life, I think. I like that. And this is, you know, of all the decks, this is the earliest one that I have that I think is a deck that is particularly, that comes from an expression of love for queer women by a queer woman. So that's Thea's Tarot. That one's a special one to me as well. I shouldn't say like they're not all special. They're special. The next deck that I have to share with you is also like very much a queer deck, and that is Slow Holler Tarot. And Slow Holler Tarot is the first collaborative deck that I've ever been drawn to. I can find them a bit challenging. But, you know, the 2SLGBTQIA community is a coalition, right? It's a very internally diverse, and having different perspectives and different artistic interpretations and voices, I think, is really great in a deck like this. It's a deck that is very, very explicitly political again. It has renamed a lot of the cards to make them gender neutral. So all of the majors that have kind of gendered titles have been renamed. The court cards are student, traveler, architect, and visionary. And they write in the guidebook, renamed cards throughout the major arcana to make them more relatable and relevant, more gender diverse, and to address concepts from a point of view that challenges the frameworks of patriarchy and capitalism. Our intention is to move away from the white, patriarchal, old European focus of traditional decks and create a deck that queer folks, people of color, and folks with various gender identities can more readily feel at home with and can more easily see themselves in. And so there's quite a few cards actually in this deck that don't depict people, but the ones that do are very clearly, in many cases, representations of members of the community. I love, again, there's like lots of body hair in this deck. Lots of tattoos in this deck. And it really does something special, this deck. This is a deck that is visionary to me. This is a deck of possibilities. And this is a deck of all the decks that I own, I think. Of all the decks, all of them. This is the deck that the guidebook most, I feel like, speaks to me. The meanings that are given for the cards just really speak to me. And the voice of the guidebook sounds like people that I love talking to me in a, you know, supportive way, but also the kind of supportive way that doesn't let you, you know, doesn't let shit slide. So I really like this. And definitely a queer deck that I love, that is sadly way out of print. I do hope that they reprint this someday, because I want folks to have this deck for sure. That is Slow Holler. Couple more. Fifth Spirit Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess, who I know is also working on a playing card deck. Love that. This deck, too, very much queer deck, overtly political. The dedication is dedicated to the queers, the outsiders, the survivors, and everyone making magic from the margins. Charlie Claire Burgess writes, the tarot has been mired in binary and biological notions of gender since its inception. While trans and genderqueer people have existed for literally as long as humans have, we're only now beginning to be included in this system we've used for so long. And they describe their decision to keep the traditional titles, of things like Empress and Emperor and King and Queen, and says, you know, many creators have renamed them to make them more accessible, and this is important. But instead, they've decided to keep them. The major arcana and the court cards all bear their traditional titles. Instead of renaming the cards, Fifth Spirit seeks to challenge the gender binary and expand notions of gender through the juxtaposition of traditional title and queered imagery. The Empress can have long flowing hair and a flat hairy chest. The Emperor can have a beard and breasts at the same time. A non-binary femme can be king, a cisgender man can be queen, and everyone in between can identify or expand or ecstatically embody any or no gender that they wish. And they note that they've tried to represent diversity in a non-tokenistic way, in a non-appropriative way. And this, I think, is a really important point, right? Because we when we have conversations about diversity and representation, it's of course important to remember that, you know, not all representation is equal. Not all representation is necessarily good representation, right? Like, you can have representation that is perpetuating of stereotypes. You can have representation that is belittling or is exploitative, or that is, you know, diverse, but is otherwise disrespectful, right? And this deck doesn't do that. It feels very contemporary. And this is one, you know, again, like representations that are loving. Depictions of our community that are loving. This is one of those for me. I intend to read there's a guidebook that is sold separately for this, that's a big guidebook. I intend to make that some of my reading for this June, to read the whole thing through. And I'm really excited for it. I'm putting cards in the wrong way. Like summer face up and summer face down. That is not what I was intending. So the Fifth Spirit, I think, is a really successful deck with gender and sexual diversity. And I've been focusing on the cards that depict people, but I love these kind of pippish minors as well, that feel really open to interpretation. Really cool. And this one, the Sun card, is the creator and their spouse. And representations of queer joy are really important, because that's, you know, that's about possibility, right? That's about representing our lives as they are and as they can be, could be. Really great. I love this deck. And I think that I will love the guidebook too, which I don't usually. I'll do a review of this guidebook once I'm done. Coming down to the last few decks, as I've gone on for a really long time. I have an Oracle deck in the bunch. And this is a deck called L'Oracle des Vieilles Dames, which is the Oracle of Old Ladies. The creator is Athénaïs Fontrevel. This is a deck that I got on Etsy. And it does come with, if you're curious, it does come with an English little guidebook and a French guidebook. The titles are not translated. The French titles are French, both in the English guidebook and in the French guidebook. But there is a translated guidebook, right? And it's specifically celebrating old women. And, you know, this is a queer deck too. And I love this deck. And there is diversity of gender presentation in this deck, and body size and shape and all kinds of things. Lots of body hair. Reine des Étoiles. This is a Queen of the Stars. Les Amoureux, the lovers. Équilibré. Super heroine. This deck just makes me happy. Les petites filles, little girls. Les bienheureuses. This is like blessed. Blessed to be together. Les planteuses. Planting. And this one, of course, has clear depictions of older women loving older women. Elle seule, she's alone, it says. And I just... Gardienne de l'étoile, the guardian of the star. This deck just is joyful to me. And it's queer joy to me in this deck. And there's, I find that some decks that are quite diverse in other ways don't always have much in the way of age diversity. And so I love that this is a deck that is celebratory of older folks in particular. So that is L'Oracle des Vieilles Dames, Oracle of Old Ladies. The last deck. I figured I would take about an hour with this one. The last deck that I want to show is Fat Folks Tarot. This is out of print. However, I have read that they're going to do another printing of this. So if this is a deck that interests you, keep an eye out because I think there's going to be another one. This one is a collaborative deck as well, made by fat artists. And this one was a fundraiser, and the funds went to Trans Lifeline from this deck, which is extra special and great. And this deck for me depicts gender diversity and sexual diversity as well. The cards do have the usual kind of king queen titles, but there's not normative kind of presentation of who's on which card in terms of kings and queens. I love that this Eight of Pentacles is in like a queer-owned tattoo shop. That is really beautiful. And there's what is that called? Like a crystal ball in the background. So it's like kind of witchy shop too. I think that that's fabulous. Lovers. And so this deck is, again, a collaborative deck. I know, like, at least Some of the creators and artists are queer identifying folks. There's certainly representations of people who definitely read as 2SLGBTQIA plus folks to me and their relationships. There's a wide kind of range of gender presentations in this deck. There's a lot of figures of color depicted. Yeah. This is a good one. It feels like quite a youthful deck. I feel like there could definitely be more age diversity in this one. It's a cool one. And it looks good laid out in a spread. The collaborative decks are a little bit challenging again, you know, in terms of cohesion. And inevitably, it's like, you know, some cards I'll really, really love and others, like, won't be my style. And that's fine. But I like the gender and sexual diversity in this deck, the Fat Folks Tarot as well. So that is my VR. That is my VR to Tom Benjamin on the 2SLGBTQIA decks that I love and that I wanted to share with you for Pride Month and always. I'm going to leave you with a little quote in the spirit of queer from Jose Esteban Munoz, Cruising Utopia, the then and there of queer futurity. And this is a book that is important to me. And this is the first little bit of the introduction, very, very short. And the epigraph for this is, "A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth glancing at." And that's from Oscar Wilde. And Jose Esteban Munoz writes, "Queerness is not yet here. Queerness is an ideality. Put another way, we are not yet queer. We may never touch queerness, but we can feel it as the warm illumination of a horizon imbued with potentiality. We have never been queer, yet queerness exists for us as an ideality that can be distilled from the past and used to imagine a future. The future is queerness's domain. Queerness is a structuring and educated model of desiring that allows us to see and feel beyond the quagmire of the present. The here and now is a prison house. We must strive in the face of the here and now's totalizing rendering of reality to think and feel a then and there. Some will say that all we have are the pleasures of this moment, but we must never settle for that minimal transport. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds." And that is what queer means to me. And so I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about queerness and representations of sexual diversity and gender diversity in tarot and some of the decks that, you know, to different extents and in different ways, I think do that and provide representations of our community. So thank you so much for watching. I'll look forward to seeing other folks' VRs. I'll see you again soon.